Have you ever just wanted to throw something away and completely start over? Maybe it was broken, or you thought to yourself, man, this thing is beyond repair. Or it was just so messed up, you didn't even want to look at it anymore. So you thought, let's throw it away, let's scrap it, let's get a new one, let's start over. One of my kids is somewhat of a perfectionist. And so when he was younger, I would remember specifically if he would ever color outside the lines, he would get really upset. Let's say he'd be coloring Spider Man and he would take the blue crayon and the blue color would go into the area where the red was supposed to be. He would get so upset, he'd put his hands on his head and he would say, "Oh," and I'd say, "What's wrong?" And he'd say, "It's ruined." And I would try to do my best Bob Ross that I could, and I'd say, "No, no, 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 you didn't make a mistake. You just made a happy accident." But that wouldn't work. He had made up his mind. He was done. It was ruined, and he would crumble it up and he would go and he'd throw it in the trash can. But to show him how much I loved it, I would take it out of the trash can or pick it up off the floor. I would uncrumble it, try my best to press the wrinkles out of it, and then I would put it up on the fridge. And I remember one time he said to me, "Take it down. It's ugly." And I said to him, "No, it's not. It's from you, and I love it." Maybe you haven't wanted to throw away a piece of artwork lately, but we've all had much bigger things that we've all had been tempted to throw away and start over with. For some of us, we've wanted to throw away a job or a career. For others of us, we've been tempted to throw away and give up on a dream. Did you know that J.K. Rowling was a single mother on welfare when she started writing the Harry Potter book series? As a matter of fact, she had wrote the manuscript and she was rejected by 12 different publishers. And she said that on multiple occasions, she considered just throwing away the manuscript and giving up because it didn't seem like it was going anywhere. For some of us, it's a lot deeper than that. It's a relationship, friends that we've had a misunderstanding with, family that we've had a falling out with, a marriage that's been struggling for years, and there's been tension and there's been miscommunication, and we're thinking of just ending it all and starting over again. For some of us, we even think of throwing away our lives. We've come to those places where we've messed up so bad and we begin to believe that things are so hopeless that there isn't any possible way to repair it. And so sometimes we even think about ending us, crumbling it up, and just being done. And the thing is that we live in a culture where cutting ties is often seen as the best solution. We live by this motto, do what makes you happy, which I completely understand that motto. I even agree with it. But here's the thing, if we aren't careful, what we will do is this: if anything makes us unhappy, unsatisfied, or if there's anything that's unpleasant in our lives, we will be tempted to just throw it away because it doesn't make us happy anymore. And some things truly are more valuable than a drawing of Spider Man. Relationships, marriages, friendships, dreams, your life, those are all valuable things. And the truth is that throwing away a friendship, a marriage, a dream, or yourself, the choice to throw those things away has a ripple effect on the world and does affect other people. So it deserves a lot of thought and a lot of consideration. For me, as a follower of Jesus, I have to look at this as the way that God would look at it. What would God say about this? And this conversation brought me to the miracles of Jesus. If you don't know anything about the miracles of Jesus, Jesus performed many miracles. We believe that he had his ministry roughly between the ages of 30 and 33, so about 3.5 years. And during that time, he performed all types of miracles. Many of them were written down, but there are some that weren't written down at all that we don't even know about. But even if you grew up in church or you didn't grow up in church, you're probably aware of a lot of them. So, miracles about like Jesus all of a sudden helping blind people see, paralyzed people being able to walk. There was the woman who had a bleeding disorder who touched Jesus's clothing and the bleeding stopped. Lazarus, who was brought back to life. And then, of course, everybody's favorite, Jesus turning water into wine. But if I asked you to write all of the miracles down that you know, I bet there would actually be one that you would miss. As a matter of fact, I even bet that if you grew up in church or you call yourself a Christian, there was one that you would miss. And the one that you would miss, actually, to me, in my eyes, may be one of the most important miracles that Jesus performed. In fact, not only is it probably the most important miracle that Jesus performed, it was the last miracle that Jesus performed. Do you know which one I'm talking about? Let me set the stage for you, okay? So, Jesus has just gathered his disciples, he's washed their feet, he set them at the table and has completely redefined Passover. He takes the wine and the bread and he says, I'm about to die, but it's not a murder. I'm allowing this to happen. It's a sacrifice, and it will be the final sacrifice that ever has to be made to atone for everyone's sins. And so this bread represents my body that's going to be broken. This wine represents this blood that is going to be shed, and it will be the last blood that ever has to be shed. And then, don't worry, 3 days later, I will rise again. By the way, has anybody seen Judas? So they finish up dinner and then they go to the garden. And Jesus tells his disciples, I want you to sit here and pray and wait for me. And while Jesus goes into the garden, the disciples end up actually falling asleep. And Jesus is in the garden and he's actually praying to his father. And he says to his father, Lord, if there's any other way for this to happen other than my death, let it be. But ultimately, God, not what I want. You do what you want. It says that Jesus was so anxious, there was so much tension within Jesus that he actually started to sweat blood, which we have found out through science actually can happen. So Jesus finishes up and he goes back to his disciples. And remember, his disciples were told to be praying while he's talking to his Father in heaven. And he comes back and the disciples are actually asleep. I mean, can you imagine this for a minute? Like, just put yourself in Jesus's shoes. We're in the middle of probably the most important event in humankind's history. Jesus has so much tension built up inside of him. He's been sweating blood. This is a huge deal, a huge moment. And you come back, and your boys, your support system, your posse, they're asleep. And so Jesus starts to get on them a little bit, wake them up, remind them, hey, you guys were supposed to be praying. And then all of a sudden it says that a crowd suddenly arrives. Now, Luke, who is not one of the apostles, he investigated this, but he spoke to the apostles. He spoke to people who were there. He interviewed all these people. And Luke's gospel is basically a report of what happened. And this is what Luke finds out. In chapter 22, verse 47, this is what he begins to say. It says, while he was still speaking, talking about Jesus, while Jesus was still speaking, a crowd came, and then the man who was called Judas, one of the 12, was leading them. He approached Jesus to kiss him, but Jesus asked him, Judas, are you betraying the Son of Man with a kiss? Now, can you imagine all of this tension? Jesus just came back. He probably looked a mess. I mean, he was sweating blood, so he probably has blood on his face or some sort of stain or blood on his clothes if he's wiped it off. He goes to the disciples. The disciples wake up. They're kind of disheveled. They've been drinking some wine. It's late. We don't know what time it is. And they're starting to have an argument. And then all of a sudden, a crowd appears, and there's soldiers and servants and public officials. And then there's Judas. And then all of a sudden, Judas goes to kiss Jesus, and Jesus stops him and goes, are you betraying me? Just imagine for a minute when that moment hits where everybody realizes what is happening. Judas has just turned on Jesus. These soldiers are here for us, and they are going to take Jesus. Everything that Jesus has told us was going to happen is about to happen. And my goodness, it may ultimately end in our death too. All of a sudden, everybody comes to the realization of what is about to happen. And all of a sudden, everybody's most negative emotions flood their minds. I mean, these people in this moment probably felt sadness, anger, betrayal, regret, remorse, heartache, panic, doubt, everything all at once. We have a hard time imagining this moment, but it really was just complete chaos. And Jesus or Luke, for a moment in that investigation, he says that there was yelling. And one of the things that everyone remembers someone saying was this. It's in verse 49 of chapter 22. Luke writes down, when Jesus' followers saw what was going to happen, they said, Lord, should we strike with our swords? So, in this moment of tension, no one knows exactly what to do. But it's like that moment right before a fight breaks out. And it's kind of the question of like, who's going to strike first? But before Jesus even has a chance to answer the question, it says that someone did just that. Luke writes down in his investigation in verse 50, it says, and one of them struck the servant of the high priest, cutting off his right ear. So, in this moment of tension of Jesus, what do we do? Someone decided to actually do something, but we don't know exactly who. Now, this is kind of funny because it says, Luke says, one of them struck the servant of the high priest. So, Luke, when he interviewed somebody, everybody's like, yeah, I don't really know who it was. Somebody pulled out a sword and did this thing. And it's kind of funny because it seems like one of those moments where your mom comes home after you've had a party and finds a vase that was broken. And she's like, who broke my vase? And nobody really wants to own up to it, and everybody's just like, I don't know. I mean, it was really loud and rowdy, and somebody did it, but it's really not important who it is. It's not that big of a deal. So Luke is like, I don't know who did it. No one really told me. Somebody. But it's so funny because when John writes his gospel later on, he tells the story, and he's like, yeah, so the guy who swung the sword, it was Peter. So John doesn't just name Peter as the person who swung the sword, but he also gives us a very other important detail. He tells us exactly who it was that got hurt, who the servant was. In John chapter 18, verse 10, John tells a story like this. It says, then Simon Peter, who had a sword, drew it and struck the high priest's servant, cutting off his right ear. The servant's name was Malchus. So imagine for a minute, there's all this chaos. There's shouting, there's some pushing and back and forth. And then all of a sudden, nobody frisked Peter at the door. Peter whips out a sword. But Peter doesn't just whip out a sword and start swinging. He specifically targeted and went for the head of the servant of the high priest, Malchus. Now, this is important. There's a reason John put his name Malchus. It's so that we could understand who this was. Malchus wasn't just any servant to any high priest. Malchus was the servant to the high priest, Caiaphas. And Caiaphas was directly involved in plotting Jesus' arrest and eventually his crucifixion. He was a well-known enemy of Jesus's. So Malchus was not just some random bystander in the way of Peter's sword. Peter was specifically targeting him. Peter was being vengeful. Peter, in that moment, was sending a message. You're here to hurt my rabbi and friend? Okay, then. Caiaphas, I'm going to take one of yours. I'm going to kill your servant. And Peter, he wasn't aiming for an ear, he was aiming for his head. But he missed him, and he takes off an ear. And then in that moment, Jesus calls a timeout. Going back to Luke's investigation in Luke chapter 22, verse 51, it says, but Jesus answered, no more of this. And all of a sudden, everything stops. So everyone stops. It's quiet, tons of tension. And Malchus is over there holding his hand by his ear as he bleeds. And he has lost some part of his ear. Let me ask you a question. For just a moment, put yourself in Jesus's shoes. What would you do in that moment if you were Jesus? Your enemy just got hurt while attempting to hurt you. Seems kind of like it was his fault, right? I mean, you play with fire, you get burned. Consequences of your actions. You went after the king, and some stuff happened. Too bad, so sad. I mean, especially if you were Jesus. I mean, put yourself in Jesus's mindset for just a minute. You're about to go through your crucifixion and death, and this dude lost an ear? Big deal. I mean, cosmetic issue, right? I'm about to lose my life and get hung on a cross. Who cares about your ear? Most of us wouldn't feel bad about Malchus losing an ear. But this is Jesus. So maybe what Jesus should have done, or maybe what you would have done, your version of grace would have been like, hey man, sorry about your ear. Peter, he's quite the hothead, but hey, kid, you'll be okay. I mean, it doesn't look that bad, right? Matthew, does it look that bad? No, 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 it doesn't look that bad at all. I mean, you can still hear, right? I mean, testing, testing, 1, 2, 3. Yeah, 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 you'll be fine. So maybe he offers an apology. Imagine this for just a moment. Jesus goes one step further. Jesus doesn't offer an apology, he doesn't blow it off. He goes to heal the man's ear. But this is so important and so often missed. Jesus is about to heal his enemy, and not just his enemy. Jesus is about to heal someone who is actively trying to hurt him. But not just someone who's actively trying to hurt him in the past and in the present, but someone that he knew full well would be trying to hurt him in the future. This was somebody who was going to oversee his crucifixion and his death. Someone that he knew full well was going to actually hurt him again. Imagine for a minute, we've seen Jesus heal all types of people and interact with all types of people. And most of it we could wrap our heads around, right? Like Zacchaeus. Zacchaeus was a bad guy, and Jesus pulled him out of that tree, but Zacchaeus ended up paying people back what he took. Matthew was taken from the tax collector's booth, and Matthew was a bad dude, but Matthew ended up being one of the disciples. The woman at the well, bad girl, but she goes back and she's a witness, and she ends up telling everybody about Jesus. Most of the people that Jesus healed or interacted with, we can somewhat wrap our heads around because they end up being good people. But this is a really, really big deal. During this miracle, the last miracle that Jesus would perform, he ends up healing his enemy, and not just any kind of enemy, an enemy that had hurt him in the past, was hurting him in the present, and was going to hurt him in the future. Christians, churchgoers, think about this for just a minute. That's the kind of king that you follow. That's the culture of the kingdom of God, the kingdom that you belong to. Most kings would let their enemies suffer their consequences. Most kings would wish harm against their enemies, but not your king, and not in this kingdom. Jesus healed an enemy. Jesus healed someone that was trying to hurt him and that was going to hurt him in the future. But it gets even better than that. This is what Luke says. Then he touched the man's ear and healed him. Now, I had to do some study on this because it's a bit confusing, but here's what I found out. The original text doesn't communicate that Jesus touched the man's ear and replaced what had been cut off. Jesus didn't give him a new ear. The text insinuates that what Jesus did when he healed the ear is that he saved what was severed. Meaning if Malchus's ear had been split in half and part of it was hanging on, Jesus went and touched the ear and reattached it. But it also insinuates that if there was a part of the ear that had been severed and fallen off, Jesus literally went, knelt down into the ground, picked up the part of the ear that had been severed and dusted off the dirt, went and touched him and reattached it. But here's the point. Jesus didn't have to reconcile this situation at all, but he did. And when he chose to reconcile the situation, he didn't just reconcile, he preserved what was lost. He could have just said, ear, grow back. And he could have grown him a new ear. But Jesus didn't give him a new ear. He preserved what had been severed. He fixed what was broken. He brought back what had been lost. Are you starting to understand what I'm laying down? I want you to go back to the illustration that we started with today. Do you ever feel like just throwing something away and starting over? God, I'm hurt. I am bleeding. I want to be done. Will you just give me a new relationship? God, they hurt me. I got nicked. God, will you just give me a new job? I'm so done with this place. I just want to get out of here. God, will you give me some new friends? I have been hurt. This relationship is broken. Can you give me some new friends? God, my dreams are broken. Will you give me some new dreams? God, give me someone new to look up to because I'm done with my parents. Or God, give me someone new to take care of because I am done with my kids. As I said, we live in a culture where if it's broken, if its function has failed, if it doesn't make you happy, throw it away and find a new one, right? But let me tell you something about our King, about our God. When you come to the throne and you show it to God and you ask Him for a new one, I believe His first response will be, I understand, and maybe that's the answer. But first, how about I try and save what has been severed? How about I heal your broken marriage? How about I heal your relationship with your parents? How about I save your relationship with your kids? How about we repair and fix those relationships, those dreams, your team that you're on, that job? How about you don't give up on yourself and I preserve your life? We talk a lot about reconciliation, but let's take it a step further and let's talk about the ministry of preservation. What if the God of the universe wants to preserve what has been severed in your life? And not just the things that have been accidentally severed or severed because of neglect. I'm talking about the areas of your life that have been severed because somebody was actively trying to hurt someone else. I'm talking about severing what has been lost with the enemies in your life. Take a breath for a moment and just ask yourself this question. What if God right now doesn't want you to move on? What if he wants to preserve what has been broken, lost, or severed in your life? Do you know where I am filming this message from? This is the glider that we were gifted when my first child was born, Olivia. She's 10 now. And this is the very glider where my wife nursed our kids. This is the chair where we read many, many books with our kids. This is the chair that we rocked them in when they were sick. This is the chair where I remember giving my son Braden many breathing treatments with his seal after he had RSV. This is the chair when I would go to change my kids' diapers, they would run from me and crawl up here and giggle and all kinds of great fun memories. Well, when the kids got old enough, we actually gave this chair away. We donated it to our church so that they could use it in the nursery. And it sat there for many years. And over time, it had so many accidents and spills on it. A spring broke, it couldn't glide anymore. All the leather was nicked and hurt. And so it was just broken and a mess. But when they were done with it, I actually wanted it back. Now, my wife looked at it and said, "Get rid of that chair. Why would you want that back?" But I still wanted it because I had had many great memories in this chair. And I really truly believe that there were many great memories to be had still in this chair. So I actually went and got it and I brought it to one of my good friends, Sue's. She is an awesome upholsterist, if you will. And I gave it to her and she took it and she preserved it. She recovered it, she replaced the spring that was broken, and she brought it back to life. And now, every morning, this is where I come to journal and read my Bible and pray right here in this very chair. I'm so thankful that we still have this chair because it's not only a place where I have a lot of good memories, memories of times when things were great, but I know that because we preserved it, there are many more great memories to be had in this chair. Here's the thing: you may have a relationship or a job or a dream that had a lot of really good memories, but some time has gone on and there have been some accidents that have occurred. There have been some mistakes that have been had, and that relationship or that dream or that job, whatever it is, it's in really bad shape. It's really sad looking. It's a mess and it is broken. And you're thinking, dude, I'm done. Throw this away. I am ready to move on. What use is this to me now? It's unsavable. And it's fine. I'll just get a new one. I want you to hold on for a minute and imagine what if. What if the God of the universe preserved it? What if that marriage was preserved? What if that friendship was preserved? What if that team that you're on or that job that you're part of was preserved? Imagine for a minute if God preserved your family. What if he could return what was severed? What if he could repair what had been lost? I know even if it is fixed, it won't look exactly the same. This chair doesn't look exactly the same. It used to be a white cream color. But the thing is that when I sit in this, it still feels like that same old chair that I love. It's still that chair. And your relationship may look different even if it is repaired. But what if? What if God could preserve what's been lost? And you're thinking, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, but I just don't know if it's possible. I mean, there have been so many mistakes. There's so many broken parts of this thing. Been so many things that have happened. How in the world could this be preserved? And I don't know the answer to that question. And really, truly, that's between you and God. And that's between you and God to figure out next. But I do know this: my wife thought this chair was gone for good. And then she saw what Suze did to it and couldn't believe it. How in the world did Jesus put that man's ear back on? I don't know. It's a miracle. But if God can do that with a man's ear, imagine what he could do with your broken marriage. Imagine what he can do with that broken friendship. Imagine what he can do with that severed relationship. Imagine what he can do with that broken dream. Imagine what he could do with you because you've made mistakes and you might start thinking, God, maybe I'm just too far gone and there's no hope for me. But don't give up hope. Imagine for a minute that God can bring you back to life and restore you for a minute. I believe that God can do that. I've seen God do that in me because I thought I was too far gone, but he preserved me. I thought my marriage at one point was gone and that relationship was severed, but he brought it back and he restored what had been lost. And I believe God can do the same thing for you. When I come each morning and I speak to God in this chair, being here doing my devotions and my prayers and my worship, it gives me hope. It's a reminder to me that the God that we serve is a God who believes in preservation. And that if we are willing to do the work and lean into him, that he can answer our prayers and he can bring preservation back. Here's what I want you to do this week. I want you to ask God to identify someone in your life that you have been ready to throw away. And I want you to ask God if he would heal, restore, and preserve that relationship. And then I want you to do the work and I want you to reach out to somebody that you've written off. And I want you to offer them an act of kindness. Maybe it's just asking them how they're doing. Maybe it's sending them a Starbucks gift card. maybe just a funny reel and say, hey, this reminded me of you. I hope that you're doing well. You can't just simply pray, God preserve this relationship. You have a part to play, and it's your job this week to take a step in their direction. If it's you that's broken and you haven't already done this, if it's you, I want you to make an appointment to see a therapist this week. And if you DM me, if you live in my area, I will give you a list of people who would be willing to help you with that. If you're a couple, and again, you haven't already done this, I want you to go to see a marriage counselor this week. And again, if you live in the St. Louis area and you're around here and you DM me, I would gladly give you a list of people who would be willing to help. For all of us, I want us all to thank God for being a God of preservation and healing, for not giving up on us. The God who is willing to step into the middle of our mess and preserve what has been lost. Let me pray for you this morning. Father God, you are the God of preservation. You are the God who returns what has been severed. You are a God who heals his enemies, knowing full well who his enemies are and what his enemies will do. Thank you for being a God of grace and mercy. Thank you for having grace and mercy on us, and thank you for being willing to get into the middle of our messy relationships and dreams and lives and being willing to work with us. God, you are the God who heals and restores. And for somebody who's listening or watching this, they have something in their life that needs to be restored, something that has been severed and lost that needs healing. And not just the kind of healing where we forgive and we forget, but possibly, God, somebody that we've written off, something that we've written off that you do not want us to give up on. So, God, if at all possible, as far as it depends on us, will you help us to do the work and allow you to restore what's been lost, to bring back what's been broken? Will you help us to not write people off or give up on people so easily? God, I believe, just as I've seen you do so many times, that many times when you bring things back that were lost, they are better. They are a story of how God and his kingdom can overcome. So, God, will you do that again in our lives and our relationships? In your name we pray. Amen.